Detective Mark Harris had spent a decade chasing shadows in Liverpool's streets. Meanwhile, Jordan "Knuckles" Malone ran one of the city's most ruthless drug networks, hiding in plain sight among the docks and alleyways. For years, their paths were separated by secrecy, strategy, and fear. But the moment Harris uncovered Malone's hidden empire, everything changed. What followed was a tense, high-stakes battle that would shake Merseyside to its core and expose a criminal network more sophisticated than anyone imagined. Liverpool was a city of contrasts. Its streets carried the echo of centuries-old trade, its docks long a symbol of commerce and connection to the wider world. Tourists marveled at the iconic waterfront and the vibrant music scene, while locals went about their routines, unaware of the hidden world growing beneath the surface. Behind closed doors, in quiet houses and forgotten warehouses, a different kind of trade was taking place, one that had quietly taken root in the city over the past decade. The drug networks operating across Merseyside were not chaotic street gangs, but highly organized criminal operations. They moved with precision, each member knowing their role and the consequences of failure. These were networks that had learned to operate under the radar, using a system of runners, lookouts, and hidden storage to evade the authorities. Deliveries were timed carefully, and shipments were often disguised as legitimate goods. Packages marked for ordinary businesses carried hidden compartments, small enough to avoid detection but large enough to supply entire neighborhoods for weeks at a time. Residents of the city noticed subtle changes, though they did not always understand what they meant. Luxury cars appeared in working-class areas. Drivers who seemed out of place hurried through streets in the dead of night, and an unusual number of anonymous parcels arrived at homes. Some were dismissed as coincidence, but to those who had eyes to see, the city's rhythm was shifting. Hospitals and clinics reported a slow but steady rise in drug-related incidents, while local councils quietly monitored growing clusters of overdoses. It was a problem too complex for surface-level policing, and for years it had gone largely unnoticed. The authorities had been aware of the networks in broad strokes, but penetrating them was another matter entirely. Investigators had relied on old-fashioned surveillance and sporadic intelligence reports, piecing together fragmented clues that often led to dead ends. Each attempt to strike at the heart of these operations seemed to fail, as if the networks could anticipate the law's movements. The city's criminal landscape had been carefully mapped by those who knew it best, and outsiders, including police, were often left chasing shadows. Even within the criminal world, there was a sense of hierarchy and discipline. Mid-level distributors managed the day-to-day flow of drugs, enforcing rules that ensured loyalty and obedience. Higher-level organizers remained largely unseen, communicating through encrypted phones and secretive channels. The leaders of these networks were strategic, calculating, and ruthless. They understood that exposure meant imprisonment or worse, and they built their operations to survive scrutiny. Every meeting, every exchange, every shipment was carefully orchestrated, leaving little trace for investigators to follow. Yet, cracks were beginning to form. Small mistakes, unnoticed at first, were appearing in the system. A missed shipment here, an unguarded conversation there, and the network's facade of invincibility began to show signs of strain. Local news occasionally carried vague reports of drug busts or arrests, but these were minor in scale compared to the network's overall reach. It was a subtle warning, like the first tremor before an earthquake, hinting that the city's underworld was not as untouchable as it had seemed. Among those watching most closely were a handful of detectives, who had dedicated years to understanding Liverpool's hidden drug economy. They knew the patterns, the routes, the key players, and the subtleties of how the networks communicated. For them, the challenge was not just to catch criminals, but to unravel a living, breathing system that had grown almost symbiotically with the city itself. These officers understood that the moment to strike would require patience, precision, and timing that could not be rushed. As Liverpool continued its daily life above ground, the stage was being quietly set for a confrontation that would shake the city's criminal underworld to its core. Streets filled with morning commuters, children played in parks, and the city hummed with its usual energy. Beneath it all, the networks moved, unaware that the calm they had relied on for years was about to be shattered. The storm was approaching, and when it hit, no one in Liverpool would remain untouched by its force. Months passed since the first faint tremors of criminal activity were noticed in Liverpool. The city continued its daily rhythms, unaware that one of its most experienced detectives was quietly working in the shadows. This officer, a veteran of the force, had spent years studying the patterns of drug trafficking across Merseyside, learning how the networks moved, communicated, and protected their leaders. What began as routine surveillance soon transformed into a daring infiltration that would provide the breakthrough police had been waiting for. The undercover operation was delicate and dangerous. Gaining trust within the networks was no simple task. Any misstep could expose the officer, putting both the investigation and their life at risk. For weeks, they moved carefully, attending meetings in discreet locations, and observing the flow of drugs from mid-level distributors to street-level dealers. Each interaction, no matter how minor, revealed more about the hierarchy and the methods used to evade law enforcement. It became clear that the networks operated like a shadow corporation. Roles were rigid, communication was coded, and every transaction was designed to leave minimal evidence. The turning point came when the officer discovered the existence of a central hub coordinating the city's drug supply. The hub was hidden in plain sight, cleverly disguised among Liverpool's ordinary warehouses and shipping containers. From here, shipments arrived, and were distributed to various parts of the city with clockwork efficiency. The network had long relied on the anonymity of the docks, using falsified import documentation and mislabeled goods to avoid suspicion. For years it had worked perfectly, until now. Unexpectedly, the investigation took a dramatic twist. A mid-level distributor, aware of the pressure building within the network, decided to cooperate with the authorities. Their decision stunned the detectives. This informant provided names, phone numbers, and schedules that revealed the inner workings of an operation that had previously seemed untouchable. Every handoff, every secret meeting, every hidden stash was documented, allowing law enforcement to map the network in unprecedented detail. It was as if a veil had been lifted, exposing the full scale of Liverpool's criminal underworld. With this information, the investigation accelerated. Officers worked tirelessly to analyze phone records, track financial transactions, and confirm shipment patterns. The network's international connections became clear. Drugs were arriving from multiple continents, smuggled into the city through routes that had remained undetected for years. It was a sophisticated operation, far beyond what most locals could imagine. The detectives' careful work, combined with the informant's revelations, had created a window of opportunity to strike at the very core of the criminal empire. But even as the pieces fell into place, danger lurked. Members of the network were cautious and suspicious, always watching for signs of betrayal. One wrong move could tip them off and jeopardize months of careful planning. Detectives had to operate with precision, balancing the need to gather evidence with the urgency of stopping the flow of drugs before the network adapted. Every day carried tension, every call and meeting risked exposure, and every observation was weighed against the lives of those involved. Slowly the plan began to take shape. Surveillance operations expanded across multiple neighborhoods, officers monitored shipments around the clock, and intelligence teams coordinated to ensure that the network's leaders could be identified. The sense of anticipation grew. A takedown was coming, one that could finally dismantle the system that had plagued Liverpool for so long. And in the quiet offices of the police station, surrounded by maps, photographs, and phone records, one thought remained constant. The city's underworld had underestimated the patience, persistence, and determination of those determined to bring it down. The day of the operation arrived with an almost tangible tension hanging over Liverpool. For months, detectives had pieced together every detail of the city's drug networks, mapping routes, identifying key players, and tracking shipments. Now all that planning would be tested in real time. Before dawn, when the streets were quiet and the city slept, officers prepared for a coordinated strike unlike anything Liverpool had seen before. Every team knew its role. Some units would sweep residential areas where mid-level distributors operated, while others moved to warehouses along the docks, targeting the central hub that coordinated the city's entire drug supply. Surveillance teams maintained positions from rooftops and nearby alleyways, monitoring for any signs of unexpected movement. The operation was a delicate balance of precision and speed. One mistake could allow suspects to flee or worse destroy crucial evidence. As officers advanced, the city remained unaware of the drama unfolding in its streets. Doors were breached, and rooms once hidden from public view revealed the underworld in stark detail. Small quantities of drugs were found in some homes, but larger caches were discovered in places designed to be overlooked, behind false walls in shipping containers and under floorboards. The sheer scale of the network became immediately clear. Stacks of cash, encrypted phones, and hidden ledgers showed how organized and sophisticated the operation truly was. But the raid did not go entirely as planned. At one warehouse, a key suspect had been tipped off. In a startling moment, officers arrived to find the building nearly empty. Surveillance footage later revealed a shadowy figure moving crucial evidence mere minutes before the raid. A move that sent shockwaves through the investigation team. The daring escape forced detectives to adjust in real time, shifting focus to other targets while coordinating a citywide search for the missing suspect. Despite this setback, the operation was a remarkable success. Multiple arrests were made, and the majority of the network's leadership was captured. Kilograms of cocaine, heroin, and MDMA were seized, along with weapons, cash, and vehicles used to transport illicit goods. For the first time in years, the city's drug trade had been disrupted and players had vanished into the night, slipping through gaps in the operation. Their absence left an uneasy question: had the network been weakened permanently, or was it merely adapting to survive? Officers knew that capturing the leaders was only the beginning. Dismantling an organization with international connections required persistence, patience, and continued vigilance. For the residents of Liverpool, the takedown was a revelation. Overnight, the city became aware that a hidden network had controlled drugs, money, and power for years. News outlets broadcast images of seized drugs, confiscated cash, and arrested suspects, leaving the public in disbelief. The raid proved one undeniable truth: no criminal operation, no matter how sophisticated, is untouchable when law enforcement combines intelligence, strategy, and courage. And so, as dawn broke over the docks, the city began to breathe a little easier. Streets that had been shadowed by fear and suspicion were now the scene of quiet triumph. Yet, beneath the surface, the unanswered questions remained. Who had escaped? Who would rise to replace the captured leaders? And how long could this fragile peace last before the networks regrouped and returned? The takedown had been a battle won, but the war against Liverpool's criminal underworld was far from over. This expanded chapter heightens suspense, includes dramatic twists, and gives viewers a clear sense of the high-stakes action during the raid. With the arrests made and the initial shock of the raids fading, investigators turned their attention to understanding the true scale and sophistication of the networks they had just disrupted. What emerged was a picture far more complex than anyone had anticipated. The leaders, though now behind bars, had built a system that operated like a well-oiled machine, and peeling back the layers revealed a web of control, fear, and meticulous planning that extended deep into Liverpool's streets. The networks functioned on multiple levels. At the bottom were street-level dealers, the visible faces of the trade, moving small quantities of drugs and collecting payments. Above them were mid-level distributors, the coordinators who ensured shipments reached the right neighborhoods and who maintained communication between the foot soldiers and the higher-ups. These middle managers enforced loyalty and punished disobedience ruthlessly, creating an invisible chain of authority that made the network surprisingly resilient. What amazed investigators most was the deliberate secrecy maintained by the top-tier leaders. They rarely appeared in person at street-level operations. Instead, they communicated through encrypted phones, burner devices, and coded messages, ensuring their identities remained hidden. Meetings took place in ordinary locations, laundromats, cafes, even small corner shops. So unremarkable that neighbors would have never suspected a thing. Every step was calculated to avoid detection, and contingency plans were in place for every conceivable threat, including law enforcement raids. The investigation revealed another layer of sophistication: international connections. Drugs were being smuggled from continents away, arriving at Liverpool docks in containers disguised as everyday goods. From South America came cocaine, while heroin was funneled through Eastern Europe. The city had become a hub, a critical point in a global trafficking network, with each shipment carefully timed and documented in secret ledgers and encrypted spreadsheets. The scale of the operation explained how the networks had grown so quickly and why local law enforcement had struggled for years to break them. Even more troubling were the findings regarding local influence. Some members of the network had cultivated relationships with individuals who held positions of authority, ensuring that certain activities went unchallenged. Bribes, subtle threats, and carefully cultivated trust allowed them to operate with a sense of impunity, at least for a time. For investigators, this revelation was a sobering reminder that the city's criminal underworld had not just adapted to its environment, it had exploited it. Yet, there was also a human element that emerged in the court proceedings and interrogations. The leaders were strategic, yes, but they were also ruthless, willing to use intimidation, fear, and violence to maintain control. Investigators pieced together accounts of coercion, beatings, and threats that kept the lower tiers of the network compliant. Loyalty was enforced not only with fear but with rewards, drugs, money, and protection, creating a cycle of dependence that was difficult to break. As investigators sifted through phone records, financial transactions, and surveillance footage, patterns began to emerge that illustrated just how much thought had gone into every aspect of the operation. Even small details, the timing of shipments, the rotation of delivery personnel, and the placement of lookouts, were carefully coordinated to minimize risk. It was a level of precision that made the networks appear almost untouchable, and yet, as the raids had shown, no system is perfect. A single informant, a missed signal, or a patient investigator could bring even the most organized operation to its knees. By the time the evidence was fully analyzed, it was clear that Liverpool's underworld was not simply a collection of street gangs. It was a sophisticated, hierarchical, and international enterprise. The arrests had struck a major blow, but dismantling the network completely would require continued vigilance and relentless pursuit. The city had been shown a glimpse of its hidden underworld, and the revelations left an unsettling question lingering, even with the leaders behind bars: how long before the system adapted, evolved, and resurfaced in a new form? The arrests had shaken Liverpool to its core. Streets that had long been overshadowed by fear and suspicion now felt strangely quiet, as if the city itself was holding its breath. For the first time in years, families walked past familiar houses without the sense of unease that had quietly settled over their neighborhood. The major players of the drug networks were behind bars, their empire fractured, and for many, it felt like a victory, a battle finally won. But beneath the surface, the story was far from over. Investigators knew that even with the core leadership removed, fragments of the networks remained, scattered across neighborhoods and waiting for opportunities to regroup. Street-level dealers reappeared in certain areas, testing the waters while the network's international connections remained largely untouched. It became clear that the takedown, while monumental, was not an endpoint. It was a pause in a cycle that crime has perfected over generations. Courtrooms became stages for dramatic revelations. Testimonies uncovered the depths of the criminal enterprise, the coded communications, the bribes, the violence used to maintain control. Some witnesses required relocation into witness protection programs, their identities hidden to protect them from retaliation. The sheer audacity of the leaders, the careful planning of the network, and the ruthless enforcement of loyalty all became public knowledge, leaving residents shocked at how much had occurred just beyond their awareness. The human cost of the networks also became painfully clear. Families affected by addiction, overdoses and coercion spoke quietly to the press, revealing stories of lives disrupted and futures stolen. It was a stark reminder that the dismantling of the networks, though necessary, was not a simple victory over crime. It was a complex and ongoing struggle with deep social consequences. Meanwhile, detectives continued their work, monitoring the city for signs of resurgence. They knew the networks could adapt quickly, replacing captured leaders with new faces, shifting routes and finding new methods to evade detection. Surveillance remained constant, intelligence teams scrutinized unusual activity, and local authorities worked to strengthen community support programs to reduce the demand that had fueled the networks in the first place. The battle had moved from the streets to the shadows, and vigilance became a permanent requirement. For Liverpool, the takedown sent a clear message: even the most sophisticated criminal operations are not invincible. The streets were safer, and the supply chains disrupted, but the city also learned a sobering lesson. Crime evolves, and new threats can emerge in unexpected forms. Residents, authorities, and communities were left to confront the uncomfortable truth that vigilance, collaboration, and persistence were essential to maintaining this fragile peace. The operation also left an enduring mark on law enforcement. Officers who had risked their lives in undercover operations, surveillance, and raids returned with a mix of relief, pride, and the weight of responsibility. They had achieved what many believed impossible: the dismantling of a city-spanning criminal network. Yet they knew their work would never truly end. In the world of organized crime, victories are temporary, and every success is a reminder that the fight must continue. As Liverpool slowly returned to its rhythm, the shadow of the networks lingered. Empty houses, abandoned warehouses, and quiet docks stood as silent reminders of what had been uncovered. The city had won a battle, but the war against organized crime was ongoing. And somewhere, in the corners of Liverpool still unseen, fragments of the network waited, observing, calculating, and biding their time. The takedown had reshaped the landscape, but the struggle between law and shadow, order and chaos, would continue. Liverpool had been changed forever, and the city and its residents would never again view the streets with